Welcome to the session on valuing diversity in leadership, practical ideas for success. So how do we harness the best of diverse leadership styles and skills? How do we create environments that value those skills? Turn it over to your anchor for today, Jan Enns of Jan Enns Communications.
Accepting and fostering diverse leadership styles is always important, even in the best of times, but especially now with this significant spotlight on this crisis situation that we're facing, this COVID climate that we're in. Our panel today is going to look at the challenges and opportunities that the unique and unusual circumstances of 2020 have presented, and look at some of the practical questions around valuing diversity in our leadership styles and why that matters.
One of the things that I find a real challenge, and obviously I'm not in politics, as we know for the last 24 hours anyway, that's not part of my job, but it is, being the face of some of the response for the pandemic has been very positive in many ways, but also very negative. And I know in leadership positions, as politicians in particular, or in high-profile positions, we become a target, and I believe that it's targeted in ways that at least I'm less able to understand. So I've got a lot of very positive responses, but there are many people who don't like what I do, or don't like the way I say it, or don't like my shoes, or don't like, and I don't feel like, and feel quite able to send me nasty notes, to leave phone calls, to harass my office staff. I've had to have security in my house. I've had death threats. You know, how do we deal with that? And I sense that people find that it's okay to do that for a woman who's up front, more so than some of our male leaders. But I could be wrong. Maybe it is that we just don't talk about it and we hide it. But it is something that I think is really important if we're going to bring up the next generation of diverse and confident leaders. We need to be able to talk about those things. We need to be able to make it not okay for any of us to get that type of abuse, really.
Now let me introduce and welcome our rock star panelists today. Joining us from the District of Summerland, just down the road from where I am, Mayor Toni Boot. And from the city of Coquitlam, one of my personal faves on social media, Mayor Richard Stewart. From the beautiful city of Duncan on the island, please welcome Mayor Michelle Staples. And from the city of Kamloops, one of the most ardent and passionate champions for leadership development for our local government electeds, Councillor Arjun Singh. And to moderate today's session, we have past president of UBCM, mayor of the District of Sauk, the ever-engaging Mayor Maja Tait. Please welcome our panel, and Maja, over to you.
Thank you, Jan, and welcome everyone on the panel, and welcome to all our delegates that are joining us today. I'd like to start the discussion by asking our panel the following. In your opinion, are we harnessing the best of diverse leaderships and skills, styles and skills, and what is your personal take or experience on this? I'll start first with Mayor Toni Boot.
Thank you, Maja. Well, you've asked for my personal take, and this is it. I would say no, but we are making strides. And by that, I think most particularly in the area of making sure that we have, I guess, non-women, that we have women or people that identify as women on our local government councils. And I think that overall, we're seeing a good move towards this. But I'll give you an example. In our council in Summerland, there are 7 of us. 3 of us are women, and the other 2 women on the council are both young mothers. In fact, they've both had 2 children during last term and this term. So that, in terms of diversity, I think that's a good move. But in terms of other forms of diversity, so people from the 2S LGBTQ+ community, not so much, well, not at all. And anyone that is part of, you know, that's racialized in the BIPOC communities, not at all. I'm the first Black mayor and first Black councillor and first person of color on council, like in the history of Summerland. And I mean, we're over 100 years old. But having said that, I think a lot of it has to do with the region where we are. So in the Okanagan Valley, it is predominantly white. The statistics show that in Summerland, 95% of the people that live here identify as being Caucasian. So I think that is, you know, where it is, you know, personally in this neck of the woods. And I think that, so I think that another thing that plays into this is, we're seeing this more during the pandemic, not only attacks against racialized communities, and it may be, I said just, but it's not really just. It may be a verbal attack, a physical attack, you know, some kind of violence or vandalism against racialized communities, but also against governments, whatever level of government, you know, that we're talking about it. It's any level of government. And I think that is, I hope it doesn't happen, but I think that will cause more people to pause or to perhaps even reconsider their move into the political realm or some kind of leadership role. It's not easy.
Thank you, Toni. Over to Mayor Richard Stewart, please.
Thank you. We in Coquitlam, we're actually the largest community in the province, doesn't have political parties at the table. So we have the benefit of being a collection of independents, but we are challenged and have been challenged. We finally, this last election, saw the addition of 2 persons of color onto council, even though the diversity of the ballot was significant. The diversity of council, the councillors that were chosen by the electorate weren't as diverse. And that applies primarily on the racial side. On the gender side, the problem was the diversity of the ballot. This last election, for example, I believe we had 16 men on the ballot and 4 women for the 9 positions. And of those, the electorate sent 75% of the women and 30% of the men to council. So we have a council of 3 to 6, female to male. And so we don't see a lack of diversity on our council. Unfortunately, getting to some kind of parity or is a function, perhaps on the gender side, is a function of diversity of the ballot, and on the racial side, it's more a function of that the candidates are diverse, but the ones that end up being chosen, admittedly by a community that is 50% of European descent, ends up, and the remainder being of diverse, about 5,000 population from each of 10 different cultural groups. So we're not as good as we could be. And I think that applies to lots of communities where we see that electoral system that chooses how we get governed perhaps has a systemic reality to it that tips the scales a little bit against the ethnic diversity that we're all seeking.
Thank you, Richard. Mayor Michelle Staples, please.
Thank you, Maja Tait. So I think it's an interesting question, because it's easy to recognize the fact that we don't have the diversity that we're all hoping for yet. And I feel like part of what it's easy for us to not acknowledge maybe during that process is that the amount of diversity we've achieved in a seemingly short amount of time. You know, when I look back at our own council, I'm the first female mayor that the city has had. We're the first majority women council the city has ever had in over 100 years. And our age diversity, we have our youngest council member is in her 20s, our eldest is in his 70s. We have diversity of political beliefs from one end of the spectrum all the way to the other and everywhere in between. And so we've achieved diversity in some ways. Do we have a long way to go? Absolutely, we do. I believe that we're moving in the right direction. And as Mayor Stewart was just saying, the ballot is not demonstrating other types of diversity at this time. And so there aren't other choices. One of the things that I was really impressed that happened in our community was the diversity that we did manage to get in spite of that. When I came on to council, I guess it was 9 or 10 years ago now, I remember sitting in a room having a discussion about diversity within our communities and what we want to build, who we want to invite to our communities. And one of the conversations was around single mothers. And at that time I was a single mother. And the question posed to us was, well, is this who you want to invite to your community? And I was sitting there thinking, you mean someone like me? I would hope so, because, you know, I'm here and we're already here. And so I feel like what we've managed to do, and Mayor Tait, I was thinking when I was sort of reading through the questions, I was thinking of the things that we don't realize exist that we need to change as we're moving through all of this. And I think of when you went on maternity leave. And there was a recognition at that time that there was nothing in local politics for people on maternity leave to protect them, because that had never happened before. And I remember standing with you after you and Councillor Kirby from Oak Bay, and us walking away from the podium, and a group of men sitting at a table saying, "Oh, are you all going to go and get knocked up now?" And I remember thinking to myself, this is really where we're at. That we should even have a debate about this, and that should be the response afterwards. And what I can say is, in that short time, we now have maternity rights as women on councils. And the last time that I was at UBCM, what I noticed was that when women's issues came up, when issues came up that had caused a lot of debate even 5 years ago, there was not people standing at the no mic, and there was men of all different ages standing at the pro mic to speak up. As women, we didn't have to be the messengers anymore, and that's changed in a short time. So just from that perspective, things have changed, yes, and yes, we have a long way to go to reach other types of diversity, but
thank you, Michelle.
Taking steps.
Thank you very much, Michelle. And over to Councillor Arjun Singh, please.
Thank you, Mayor Tait. Just hello from Squamish Territory, from Kamloops, BC. I am sorry I have to kind of get off this call in a bit, but I'll be back for the questions. I do want to just say that just building on what Mayor Staples was saying, let's reflect on how far we've come, and we're having these conversations, now. I mean, a bit of a secret, I kind of call myself an Oreo cookie because I'm brown on the outside, but I grew up in Kamloops. I don't speak Punjabi. I'm pretty white on the inside. But the fact that my name is Arjun Singh and I'm the first Indo-Canadian on my council, it means something to people, right? And also the idea of having, like, everybody on this panel right now, have all shown courage and stepped up in so many different ways. And that's, I think, the personal nature of what this takes is actually diversity. We're getting more and more of it. We're getting it in different ways. I've been lucky in Kamloops. We've had diverse councils for many, many, many years, but it's not been obviously as balanced as it could be. But the fact that people of different ethnic groups, women, people of different orientations have stepped up to serve, run, and get elected, and then actually stand in the fire sometimes when they get some discrimination is so critically important, because I think we're paving a way in this sort of era for a lot of folks. So the conversations are happening. They have to happen in terms of us also having the courage to actually keep them going in a really meaningful way. And I wouldn't say not by calling people out so much as actually reaching out a hand as much as we possibly can, right? I mean, if people are called out, I think people with power can be called out, but a lot of folks who are talking about are people who are also feel a lack of power or maybe a loss of power than what they used to have. And so we need to actually kind of figure out ways to sort of do this in a way it's actually quite a bit more around reaching out and calling out where we have to as a last resort. So that's kind of my comments on that. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Arjun, and everyone. Our second question concerns the effects of emergency situations such as the pandemic in relationship to the readiness to hone and accept diversity of leadership styles. In my experience as the mayor of Souk, there's a tendency during tough times to be more ready to let go of certain conventions. This leads to a more unquestioning, more open, more collaborative environment. Would you say that the pandemic has opened up some doors that we can walk through more easily now? Is the environment more conducive to accepting the diversity challenge? Back to Mayor Boot, please.
Thank you, Maja. I have a really short answer to this question. And I think that I would agree with what you said during this time, or perhaps another time, say a wildfire, something that we're often dealing with here in British Columbia. Yes, I think that we pull together as a community and we're more collaborative. We're more open to maybe having a little bit more empathy for friends and families, neighbors, and people that normally we probably wouldn't even socialize with or talk to or anything like that, really have any connection with. I think that the pandemic has shown that we can be more cooperative and work closer as a community, and that, to me, that's a really good thing. Having said that, though, with the incidents that we had in Summerland, in the the racist incidents that we had 4 in a very short period of time, and I would say that the pandemic, and I don't know this, but I suspect that the stress and anxiety around the pandemic, not only in our communities, but at the council table, has had an impact on how people are responding to these challenges that we've been facing in our community, and not a positive impact. So to answer the second part of that question is, I think that doors have been opened in terms of the acceptance. It's more it could be easier, but I don't think that it is easier. I think that there is an opportunity there, but I don't think that, at least from what I observe in this community and generally, that we're quite ready to accept the challenge of diversity.
Thank you, Toni. Mayor Stewart, please.
Wow. I'll say right off the bat, and we saw it earlier, the Dr. Bonnie Henry has shown us all a style of leadership that I'm sad to say wouldn't get elected, but ought to be. She's shown that quite often the correct response is a knowing smile and then a gentle reference to being kind. It has, to some degree, affected the way I approach things as well. I've always believed that we need to, and I think local government has to embrace this more, that we need to look at the experts that are designing our traffic signals, for example, and not look to council. And it's okay for council to show leadership by saying that the experts are going to guide us on this. And we've seen this in the provincial government's response to COVID. And so when someone says there are good things coming out of the pandemic, I actually believe that's true. There are good things, heaven forbid, but there are good things coming out of the pandemic. And one of them is the ability, I think, to accept the diversity of leadership styles here in British Columbia, whereas there are jurisdictions where we see that a particular leadership style ended up dominating the response to the pandemic and perhaps some of the response to the response. And that wasn't helpful. And I'm being deliberately vague, but I think we all know that the wide range of leadership styles can all be brought to bear particularly when there's a crisis. We can look to that diverse range of leadership approaches rather than sticking to the old dog and trying desperately to learn a new trick.
Thank you, Richard. Mayor Staples, please.
It seems like such a loaded question in so many ways, because the optimist in me wants to say, of course, we've learned so much and we've grown and we've come together, and we've cried together and we've struggled together, and we've been innovative and inventive together, and we've done all of these things, and of course we'll continue that. But the more realistic part of my personality then sort of takes over and recognizes that even through this pandemic, that's true to a degree and in some places, but those opportunities when people have to sort of slip back into what is comfortable and what is normal, and that sort of need to get back into that comfortable place, because none of this is being comfortable. How do we not allow that to overwhelm us from actually taking those things, those gems that we gathered through all of this, and have those be the things that kind of light our path forward? And so I vacillate between those two things, and probably another 100 variations of all of those constantly, as trying to sort of plan, what will this look like? What are those things that we don't want to go back to? What are those things that we want to invite more of? We have an incredible leadership team in our region, and made up of all different leaders from First Nations, from different levels of government, from medical health officer, police, school district, and we all come together, and we've come together more and more through this pandemic. And we've also run into some real places where the pressures and needs of the community make us have to really sit in the middle of the fire of discomfort, in a time that we're already sitting in and walking in and living in discomfort, and trying to move forward and in a new way, and where it's not one person saying this is how we're going to do it, but it's all of us saying we don't really necessarily know how we're going to do this, but we know we can't do it using the same tools that we have before. And we know that when we did come together to address, things like making sure everyone was fed in our community, or that people had housing, or that people had security, more security for businesses. There was all sorts of things that we did that we were able to do that really, really quickly, and in ways that we never would have considered it before. But can that withstand the need for, well, now we need to settle down and kind of go back and, walk on that steadfast sort of way? Can we withstand that? That's, I think really the question, and it is up to us. There was a woman who gave a talk at one of the conferences, the VAIDA conference, I think it was, and she said, we're the creators of our future. So we get to decide what that future looks like. So we have to choose really carefully as we build these ways forward, because every choice that we make is creating the future. And so is it going to be the choice that I'm making today? Is it going to walk us towards that gemstone that we found along this way? Is it going to light that up, or is it going to forget that it ever existed? And those are choices that we each have to make individually, but we also need to make them together, not just with other local leaders, but with our community and with all levels of government. And so how do we do that? And will we ever even have time to have the conversation about what we want that to look like moving forward? Because if we don't take that time when we get to the other side of this, how do we make the right choices so that we're building something that we all want to exist in, based on what we've learned through this?
Thank you, Michelle, and our other panelists. Our final question is a bit challenging because each situation is different. But if you were to think about a recommendation as to what each of us can do in and around our own decision-making table to make valuing diversity characterize the new blueprint we are building, what would that be? Over to Mayor.
Thanks for that, Maya. It's this is a tough question. I think that it can be divided a little bit. If we're talking about at the council table, so in leadership roles, I think the first thing that we can do is to gain a better level of understanding, like through education. So educating council and understanding, so this is at the council level, understanding the value of having diversity around the leadership table, and also understanding the value of learning and embracing, welcoming other cultures and different ways of doing things. And I think that, it's difficult because, these our Western countries are very individualist cultures, and other cultures, Indian, our First Nations, they are more of a collectivist cultures, and the two don't meet in any way, shape, or form. So I think that there is a good an opportunity to have some education and some understanding. And I think another thing that council can do, and this is a real tricky one, and that is to establish some kind of policy. I know that the provincial government has talked about working in this next 4 years on an anti-racism act, but you can't legislate anti-racism. It takes a willingness to understand and a willingness to go into uncomfortable areas. And then I also think, and this is moving to the staff level, there is there is work that can be done at the staff level, whether it be staff of a business or staff at the municipal hall or the district or city, and that is the same kind of thing. And I think that has to include work on the UNDRIP work, the reconciliation work, and tackling those actions. And again, I think that Action 57 is the one that is most relevant for municipal or local governments, but at the same time, that still has to start with an understanding and a willingness to do the education. And speaking of the willingness, I think that at the council level and the staff level, it should be a mandatory thing. Just like there's bullying and harassment policy and staff training, and I think it should go to council as well. I think that should be mandatory. The third level, of course, is our constituents, and so people out in the community. And again, that would not be a mandatory thing, but it has to, I think it should be made available for people that want to, that are willing to open themselves up, examine themselves. We've heard again, and I'll repeat it again, it's not a comfortable place to be. And we're doing work on that here in Summerland. We're partnering with other groups, of course, to do that work. One thing that Michelle said earlier was it's so refreshing in a relatively short period of time to attend a UBCM meeting and where we're talking about resolutions that are women's or gender equity resolutions, that there are lots of people that are not women or identify other than men that are supporting the rest of us. And that is, I've noticed that as well, and I think it's so refreshing, and I think that is a huge step in the right direction. And I am hopeful that I know that UBCM is doing work this year and perhaps in future years on anti-racism. And it really, again, it starts with understanding that and be willing to take on some extra education and learning what the value of diverse communities are, or diverse populations or diverse leadership have, and how it just raises everyone up rather than I think it was Mayor Stewart that mentioned this, rather than people having the feeling that you're losing something or you're going to lose something if you are part of raising people up. So no easy answer, but those are my thoughts anyways. Thank you.
Thank you, Toni, and it is a challenging question, so I appreciate your response. Mayor Stewart, please.
We in our community, we perceive that our diversity is our biggest strength. We of course have the Coquitlam First Nation on whose land we live, but we also have so many other cultures that we want to embrace. And the question included the phrase valuing diversity. It didn't. It wasn't so much an anti thing. It was how to get the positive realities, the value of diversity. And I'll use an anecdote. The question often comes up: should it be made mandatory to vote? Should people have to vote? And should we have a fine if you don't vote? And I've always taken the position that no, either we don't want a bunch of people that don't want to vote, being forced to vote. We want them, what we really need them to be is engaged enough so that they need to vote, that they feel that they value the democracy that they live in enough. We want to instill that feeling of value associated with that good, in this case, the good of diversity. So being able to look at all of our questions through the lens of how do we make sure that it is relevant and supportive of our diverse community. I look back at the pictures of mayors and councils in our community and in every other community. You can look at, if the debate happened down in the United States about their vice president, and if you look at a picture of all of the vice presidents of the United States, the most recent elected vice president is remarkably different from every single other vice president. Remarkably different. But the same would be the case of every city council that existed in most of our communities down through 100 years or more. In our community, it would be white men for the right up until 20 years ago, I think, maybe 30 years ago, when we had a female alderman. We called them aldermen, which sort of underscores that this wasn't meant to be a diverse position or a diverse form of government. Thankfully, we've changed the names, and that's an important part of it, is make sure that the language we use is supportive, but also make sure that at every step of the way, we are making advancements. It's not all, we're not going to make it all at once, but I'm so proud of the strides we've made in the last decade and the strides we've made in the last year. And some of that is because of COVID, and some of it is because of Black Lives Matter and other the challenges that we face, because we all accept that a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and let's move us forward whenever we have an opportunity to move forward.
Thank you, Richard. And over to Mayor Staples, please.
So I feel like one of the things that if I could go back to my council table and sit around with council and staff and just sort of digest everything as we prepare to move forward, I feel like one of the things that I would ask of all of us is to be fearless moving forward, and to not give in to being exhausted, and not give in to being disheartened because of, as things change, it's always like that pendulum shift, right? Or there's a lot of different analogies that people use, but as things change, and as we start to have these conversations and recognize diversity is not only accepted here, but that diversity is something that we all want to strive for. We want more diversity. We want more inclusion. As we do that, when we come into times of tension, and I believe this happens with everything, is that during those times of tension, we try to hold on because we don't know what's on the other side of giving up our beliefs or changing our beliefs, right? And so we hold on tighter, and as we hold on, there's some ways of responding to that or reaction. And so during times of crisis, it's like things can be going well, and then you have a blowout, and then you really get to test how well things are going. And that's when all the ugly kind of rises to the surface. And so as much as we've seen through this that is beautiful, that makes me, just almost feel absolutely overly emotional about the beauty of humanity, I've also seen the opposite of that. That's my pendulum that I go back and forth on. And I don't want to get lost in that. And if I get lost in that, or if my council at our table, we get lost in that. And if any of us do, and we get tired of having to stand up in spite of that again, and reach out and say to our neighbor who looks different than us, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, and stand up for, whatever it is that they're being attacked for, whether it's a racial attack, whether it's a gender attack, whether it's a gender attack on us. How do we keep standing in that? because as we start to change and change happens, that fight to keep things the same, right? It also gets energy behind it and it grows. And I know from the people in you know, at council, we've had these conversations in my community with other leaders in my community and in other communities, that there's that time that you really question, why am I doing this? You know, this is taking so much away from my family, from my spirit, from all these different things, because you feel at times like, you know, not only are you under a microscope, but there's a microscope that's actually shooting things at you from places that, you know, you don't even know where they're coming from. And so when we go, you know, as we've moved through this, we've had those times in our community, and I know we've all had those times during this, and that we still will moving forward. So how do we not give in to that? How do we not, you know, how do we bring, we've been having this conversation, how do we bring other people and say, you know, this is a safe place to be who you are and bring the gifts that you have to these roles. You should run for office where you're going to most likely have to work another job, have a family, balance all of these things, be under the microscope, be attacked for everything about you, you know, from the color of your skin to your beliefs to, you know, the assumptions about you, and the list goes on and on and on. But we need you here. So I think that that's, you know, something that at all of our tables, how do we not only, you know, convince each other that we've got this and that we can, you know, keep walking through all of this, but convince others that, yeah, please come in, because we need you here. The future needs you. And it's not going to be easy, but it's not easy when all those other things take over either. And that we already know, because that we're pushing through those barriers and through those boundaries. So I think the recommendation is hang on to each other, you know, hang on to our own spirits, our own selves, and be willing to walk through that fire together, because it's not going to, I don't think for a while now, that fire is going to simmer down. And so we need each other to, you know, and we need to help other people recognize that they're going to face all of these things, but they will be supported. There will be people around them that will help walk them, that will walk beside them through this. And so I think that maybe that's not a recommendation necessarily to my council, it's to future councils, but it is really to myself and to, you know, my colleagues as much as anything.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, panelists. That wraps up the questions that we had for our panelists today. I just wanted, sorry, yes, of course. Go ahead, Mayor Stewart.
I'll speak on behalf of the men, because the men do need to step up here. When we go out, I go, you know, before every election, and you talk to people in the community about potentially putting their name forward, and the questions I get from men candidates or potential candidates are completely different from the questions I get from potential female candidates. And part of it is the way we do politics, because politics is not an environment that is pleasant all the time. It's not an environment that people want to be in, quite frankly. And I think that we as men need to stand up when crap happens to anybody, but particularly the kind of stuff that we see get thrown at women and people of color in the political circles. And all too often there's silence, and silence is consent. Silence is part of the problem. And so I urge the folks that look like me to stand up for diversity, to stand up to make sure that we're a welcoming environment at public hearings, we're a welcoming environment on the ballot box, that across this province, that local government can show the way by being welcoming of the diversity we're seeking.
Thank you very much for speaking, Richard, and all of our panelists. I just wanted to share that while the work we do can be very challenging, it's very rewarding as well. So to touch on something that Michelle said, I think when I talk to potential candidates is also what happens is you have amazing experiences and you also meet incredible humans. And I've benefited by forming lifelong friendships. And I never expected that when I first started this work. But really seeing how just true compassion and what that looks like and what standing together strongly feels like and looks like. And that's the inspiration, I suppose, that keeps me going. And when it's possible, I would encourage everyone, when you can, to go in and read to your students in your various schools. The teachers have always been very welcoming for me to do that. And it's an opportunity to engage with our next generation of leaders. And I find now it's fun to be approached by some of the children that I've met, and they've introduced me to their parents, and to have young women, boys and girls, everyone come in and talk. It's really fascinating. And I see that the language is changing. I'll use an example. The other day, my son and our dog were looking out the window. Our dog was barking. So I asked him, what is Sandy, your dog, barking at? And he said, he's 5 now, well, a human went by with its animal. And I said, a human, like a man or a woman? It's like, well, does it really matter, Mom? Like, okay, you wouldn't make a good witness if there was an incident, but interesting that the language is changing. So I'm more mindful of my language now and how I use that and what does matter in the end. So I just wanted to share that with you. But I always find the questions and the conversations that come, even from our kindergarten age upwards, fascinating and inspirational. And when you get the dialogue going, I believe that the future generation has this in hand. And the work we're doing is so important because we owe it to our future grandchildren. And I'd like to feel that every child has an equal opportunity going forward. So I know that when the going gets tough, the tough get going, but we are stronger together. And I just want to thank all of our panelists for participating today. So we have a few minutes for questions. So I'll now give the word back to Jan Enns, please.
Can I add one more quick thing just about the youth? Is that okay? Because one of the things that just reminded me of was when I first got elected, I was asked to go speak in a school about, I had already been asked, and I went in and all these girls lined up afterwards. They announced that I was coming in because the election was the Friday before, or the results, sorry, or was the Saturday before. And so they announced that, newly elected mayor, the first female mayor in the city. And so at the end of this presentation that I gave, all these girls started to line up with little pieces of paper, and I didn't know what they were doing. And the teacher said, "Oh, they want your autograph." And so I was just so touched, and they were asking me questions like, like, you're the first, girl mayor, like, could I be mayor? And some of them were couching, and I said, hey, you could be mayor and chief, like, but I didn't recognize, that would be part of this. And so just to hear that just me being here made them see, themselves in this place in the future that I never would have imagined myself in when I was their age.
That's so inspiring and uplifting, and a perfect segue into the next section, which is about our questions. So thank you, panelists. Thank you, Maja. And we open the floor for questions. We'll take our first one now. Hi, and welcome back, everybody. Great to see you. And let's start with our first question. There's actually a couple that are quite similar. So to start the ball rolling, I'm going to pass this one over to Michelle to kind of continue on that theme that you were talking about. But really, there's an interest in what can we do to grow our youth generations, our younger generations, and move them into politics. In order to achieve diversity in our younger generations, we need to be able to make sure they can see themselves in these seats. Mentorship, education, inclusion, remuneration is another one. Making way for these folks. What are we doing to support people into politics? And as I said, let's go first to Michelle and then over to you, Richard.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for everything that was shared here today. So one of the things that we were successful at when I was council before I was mayor, we had a youth council, and I think that an investment into youth councils, where it was across the board, an investment for all councils to have a youth council, that provides not only mentorship, which is crucial, but it also provides input from youth. But the thing that we struggled with the most was the ongoing funding. Being a small municipality, how do we have staff, time, and hours to support that? It does take, a fair amount of work, but it's absolutely 100% worth it. The work that group did in 3 years, they won awards for what they did, and one of those youth actually now sits on our council. And so those are the success that can happen when you find ways to bring youth into the conversation. So maybe it isn't, just making sure there's more youth being elected on, but providing youth space to be involved in the conversation, invite them in a meaningful way, provide some funding for projects for them to work on, and staff and council representatives that can support them through that process. And over time, what you get is people who they're not all obviously going to want to run for local government or any form of government, but other youth that were involved in that are still heavily involved in other areas in the community. So it doesn't just help supporting that role of succession and building those opportunities, but it also helps overall. The remuneration piece, well, that's a problem that all of us struggle with in smaller governments. So that's a broader question, I feel like right now. But I think providing youth those opportunities at least opens that door and brings them in.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. Richard, I think you had something to say on remuneration.
Well, it's an issue that every council deals with it. We often hear that comment, isn't it nice to be able to vote on your own salary? No, it's not nice. None of us want to do that. I've advocated for years the idea that there would be a matrix, a simple, let's have UBCM, the provincial government, work on it and say that depending on the population and the number of councillors, perhaps your growth rate, this is the salary for a councillor, and make it a fair salary, make it something that will attract people, because sometimes we end up with a council that is simply a group of people that can afford to do it, because the rest of the population is out there trying to find full-time employment that pays enough to feed their kids, and you end up with some semi-retired and whatever. So find those barriers, and remuneration can be a barrier. There are many others. In the 2014 election, it became apparent that some of our female candidates were being criticized because their wardrobe wasn't extensive enough to run for council. None of the men were. After that, I actually spent 15 months in the same suit, something I got laughed at occasionally by some of my colleagues, and nobody noticed that a politician could be 15 months in the same clothes if they're a man, but not if they're a woman. And I think that there's those kinds of hidden barriers. Remuneration is a big part of it, though, and working conditions, and making it so that the job isn't really a conflict-laden reality television show. Because there's a group of people that don't mind participating in that, but that's not necessarily the group of decision makers we want leading in our communities.
So true, and especially the part about the reality show. Anyone to add anything? Anyone want to add anything to that? Yes, Toni.
Thank you, Jan. I just wanted to follow up on something that Mayor Stewart just said, and he was talking about kind of first his suit, and then talking about making sure that there is an equitable and safe workplace for regardless of who you are on council. And I would like to suggest that we're all involved, and I mean all local governments and other workplaces throughout the province are putting a lot of time and work, and it's absolutely necessary, into anti-bullying and anti-harassment policies and training. And I think that it's really important for councils to also take that kind of training, because we're people too, and we have our ideas, and sometimes we express those ideas in potentially inappropriate ways. And fellow councillors, in my opinion, they should be calling their colleagues on that kind of behavior around the council table. So not only for our work, for our staff, but for councillors as well. Thank you.
Good comments there. Thank you, Toni. Actually, that leads into one of the other questions that I thought was particularly interesting. Some of these racially or sexually biased conversations happen in the moment, exactly as you were mentioning, Toni. And if we do nothing, we can be seen as complicit in the conversation. We've seen some examples of this on social media, of course, not so long ago. Can you share any key messages you may have in your back pocket that help you deliver a thoughtful and timely response about something inappropriate? Who wants to tackle that one? Maja?
Point of order. That's the first, when you're in a council meeting, is you need to call it out. A point of order will enable the chair to stop proceedings, and then you could just say simply, I find that comment unprofessional. It has no place in these chambers. I learned early on that council chambers should be like a courtroom and be treated in that way. And given how much we impact everyone in their daily lives, the environment must be a safe one. So you can put together all kinds of policies and procedures and messages and the like. But if the behavior happens and you're not doing anything, it can be just hypocritical. It's a shiny something that hangs on a wall, but it actually means nothing. You need to call it out and interrupt it every single time it happens. And in that way, you can start to have the conversation of, when you said that, I felt this, or maybe a resident would feel that, and you can draw attention to it. But then that way you can get on with the council business. And if it continues, then you need to start taking action, because there's no place for today. And I think prior to the pandemic, the Me Too movement was very strong. And I grew up in a time when we always heard sticks and stones, and you just sort of swallow the things that hurt because the words don't hurt me. Well, the words did hurt me, and they hurt children and people all the time. So we have to stop that type of behavior. And will the person, maybe they say, well, I didn't recognize if I said this or that. Well, then it's time for you as a leader, or that person as a leader, to do a bit of self-awareness. You're setting an example, you're representing everyone in your community, and maybe your behavior needs to change. It's important to call it out. So your one-liner is a point of order, or you can rephrase it. If it's a member of the public, you can interrupt it and just say, like, did I hear you say this? Okay, because then it doesn't create a big thing, but it calls enough attention, and it needs to be done every single time. And in that way, you can change the tone of the meeting. I mean, just think of the person who may be enduring or suffering. If they see you ignoring it, it just means that it's continually okay, and it's time for a change in that way. So I feel very strongly about this, obviously, but it's time to change the conversation and the language, and to set the table for the generations, and for everyone to know that your council chambers is a safe and inviting place for everyone who is serving and those who wish to come forward and address council as well.
Excellent tips, Maja, especially the point of order and also the passive response that you mentioned there as well. Good key message. Richard, I believe you had your hand up.
Yes, and I was going to say exactly how she ended. Maja mentioned that to the public, because the public will quite often be the one that is the antagonist in that situation. It could well be a council member against a staff person, and we have to remind council all the time that staff don't get to defend themselves. That's a defenseless person standing at the microphone, and I had to actually walk out of a meeting at one point, go into the lobby and speak to the staff person that I could tell had taken it personally. I won't say gender or anything, but there was a moment there where we almost lost a really good staff person because of the political motivation behind a comment that really had nothing to do with the staff person. And we need to, exactly as Maja said, make it so that everyone understands council chambers is a safe place to be. When I was in the legislature, one of the things that saddened me the most is the way the legislature works, and that we would bring in classrooms of kids to show them how democracy works. They would sit in the visitors gallery and watch us yelling insults at each other. Yeah, I'm never going back, but we would have to make sure that council chambers is a safe place.
Excellent. Thank you. Arjun, I believe you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of think about the idea of calling things out publicly versus calling them out potentially in a private session, especially the first time or in those kinds of situations, because I've been guilty of inadvertent boneheadedness in my city council service from from here and there, and sometimes people either won't tell me or I'll find out from something. So it's important to have these conversations. For sure, they're difficult to have. But I would reflect on just the idea of calling someone out right away publicly, especially as a first kind of a time. I think what Mary Elliott from Squamish was talking about yesterday around the idea of having these debriefing sessions, regularly scheduled after a council meeting, potentially as a way of doing it too. So I really value, and Maja Tait's an amazing friend of mine, and I don't want to ever say that she's wrong about anything. But I think that we have to think about diverse approaches to those things, but how we kind of make those things the most effective way, because sometimes when you call someone out publicly the first time, it can cause bad feelings that last.
Mm-hmm. Maja, one comment, and then I'm going to do a rapid round for everybody to be able to provide 1 point. So Maja, please go ahead.
I saw in the chat that someone had been called mummy in a council meeting by a colleague, and I'll just say that, yeah, if one of my councillors called me mummy, I would address it there on the spot in public. Everyone you're all adults, have the ability to choose your words. So, well, I appreciate what Arjun is saying. It can't be tolerated. I think that's how people have gotten away with incorrect and impolite behavior. So the change starts with all of us, you, me, all of us together.
Absolutely. Which brings us to the last question, and this has to be a rapid round. We've got 2 minutes left. Just a quick, let's go around the room. And what's the one practical step that you would recommend to someone to do today to help increase the value of diversity and inclusion at their council table or board table? Who wants to start that one off? Michelle, thank you.
Start having the conversation. It's as easy as that. Have the conversation everywhere. Have it at your council table, have it with your staff, have it with your family, have it with your friends around, have it online. Start having the conversation and continue to have it, because if we don't talk about these things and we don't provide space for us to have sessions like this, to have dialogues about it, we're going to keep talking about what to do. We'll just start.
Great. Thank you. Have the conversation. Richard, over to you.
Well, exactly. If the issue is that there aren't enough people of color on the ballot or not enough women on the ballot, then approach 100 women and say, you're someone I respect and value. Why would you not run? And listen to what they say, because those barriers are really harming our democracy. If they are keeping a good part of our population feeling alienated or feeling as outsiders from the political institutions that set public policy, we have to find those barriers and eliminate them.
Excellent. So recruit. Conversations, recruit. Arjun, you got like 8 seconds.
Yeah, just reach out to folks who are not well connected and really listen to what they're saying.
Listening. Excellent. Toni?
Oh, I just wanted to mention that there is one of our colleagues who may be on this call who is taking some strong action, and that is Westminster Councillor Nadine Nakagawa. She and a friend or an acquaintance, a business partner, have set up the Feminist Campaign School. So that's something that's being done by a councillor in our province.
Fabulous. Excellent. And we can get on more info about that perhaps on the chat line as well or through New West. And Maja, to close it off, thank you again for moderating today. Over to you for the last word.
I would say, look in the mirror. The change begins with you. It begins with me. So what can you do different, and how can you lead different and be more inclusive? I think it begins with us.
Excellent. Thank you, panelists. What a great session. Great insights. Excellent.
Yay.
What a great conversation. Thank you very much, panelists, Maja, Jan. That was very interesting to listen to.